ahead and start the meeting. I know more folks keep joining in, so we'll allow them to trickle in, and I'll make sure we all keep an eye on muting everybody as they join in once the presentation starts. But good evening, everyone. This is our third meeting of 2021 for the Lafayette subsection of ASQ. Just mute everybody on entry. At this time, there's no immediate order of business that I'm aware of for the section. I will unmute Scott here. Scott, is there any order of business you're aware of at this time?
No, nothing really has changed from ASQ headquarters. We are still at virtual meetings at least through the spring. I was told that they would be discussing it as we got closer to summer, and there would be a message sent out at that time as to what we're doing with the fall. Otherwise, ASQ is still doing certifications. If anybody is interested in knowing what certifications are coming up, if you just let me know, I can forward those emails to you, or you can go to the asq.org website, and they have a list and locations where all of them are being offered. And that's really about all.
One second, I apologize. Got an unhappy baby here, so trying to remain muted.
I'll just take this opportunity to thank Sophia for offering to provide this information. Should be some very interesting information on how you guys were able to make it through the pandemic, come up with a vaccine, all with all the different COVID regulations, and I'm guessing not necessarily sidestepping, but with the government's approval, cutting some of the red tape that's necessary when you're normally running through vaccines and other medicine that you guys are providing.
Are you ready for the presentation?
Yes, I apologize. I'm back. We can go ahead and start the presentation this evening. So I'll hand it over to you, Sophia. And if you want to give a introduction to yourself, and then we'll continue with tonight's presentation.
Absolutely, yes. So welcome. So happy to see attendance is higher than I expected, so it's exciting. Hopefully you're here because this topic is interesting to you. I know personally, I really enjoy tailoring what I'm talking about to the interests of the audience. So if there's anything that, I mentioned something and you have a thought and you want to ask a follow-up question, feel free to interrupt. Don't feel like you can't. I think it's kind of better in the moment sometimes than at the end. But there will be some Q&A at the end. So if you'd like to hold a question, or maybe it's a question about something I didn't specifically cover, we can do that as well. And then, if you ask a question and you're willing or able to turn your camera on for that moment, I love connecting face-to-face with people as much as we can right now. So feel free to turn your camera on if you want. Okay, so my name is Sophia Percival. I met Jared back in college. So we both went to Rose-Hulman together and got engineering degrees. I studied biomedical engineering. And like some people, I'm assuming on this call, graduated at the time when our economy was in a recession. So jobs were not the easiest thing to find, and ended up taking a job working as a consultant for the pharmaceutical industry. My dream and passion was tissue engineering, and I fully intended to actually live in West Lafayette and work at Cook Biotech. I had interned there and fell in love with that company, but things ended up with me in pharma, and I ended up really liking it, and I've been there ever since. So I worked in Indy, contracting at Lilly for a while, and then ended up moving down to Bloomington to work at what was then called Cook Pharmica. Cook Pharmica was founded, I think, in 2008. It was a CDMO, contract manufacturing organization. It started with drug substance, bulk drug substance, biologic manufacturing only. And then about 2012, 2013, we added in some drug product formulation filling capacity with the addition of 1 vial and 1 syringe line. I joined the company 11 years ago. So when it was very small, I think my badge changed, but it used to have my employee ID number on it. It was less than 200, and that'll be relevant when we get a little deeper into this presentation. And have just loved seeing how everything's grown. And honestly, when we did the acquisition with Catalent and we changed from Cook Pharmica to Catalent about 2.5 years ago, that was a really big milestone. With Catalent investing so much money in the site, we just started growing from that point, and I didn't think it could get faster. And then the pandemic happened, and it was transformative to see, when you are kind of at the forefront of a solution, how quickly things happen that previously you had barriers, and a lot of the barriers are still there, but now all of a sudden people are motivated to find creative ways to get through the barriers. So I'll talk about a couple of those challenges in this presentation. What happened when, taking us back to about a year ago, at that time, North America really had a shortage of formulation and filling capacity. So when I talk about that, what I'm talking about is, just in case, maybe some of you work in medical devices, I don't want to assume everybody knows a bunch about pharmaceutical manufacturing, but you're taking product, right? You're formulating it to make it in the right concentration, and then you're filling it into a vial or a syringe or sometimes a cartridge. So this is actually some of the Moderna vaccine. It's a non-sterile sample that I took from one of our practice batches. But that's the type of thing that seems so simple, but to be able to do it in a sterile manner and to be able to mass produce that. And in our case, we change, today might be client A and tomorrow's client B and Wednesday's client C, and every day is different. It's really quite difficult. And at the time, so North America we had plenty of companies that had formulation and filling, drug product manufacturing, but most of them were either booked to capacity, or they were owned by the same company that their product's being made for. So you can think, Lilly is a good local example, right? They have their own capacity, but they're booked making commercial product with Lilly's name on it, and so they're not quick to be able to meet the need of something like a pandemic. CDMOs, where we're contracted out, have a little bit of an advantage there because we sell time on our filling lines, and if we're able to figure out efficiencies, then we're able to gain more time on our lines and have capacity. So Catalent was very early to engage with some of the companies that were talking about vaccines for COVID-19 and treatments. And because of that, we were kind of put in the situation to be on the forefront of delivering. There were 3 big hurdles we had to overcome, and I'll talk about those. So there's a preface to what we're going to dig into. The speed to deliver was probably the biggest one. And along with that big hurdle were things like staffing, keeping people happy and safe during a pandemic while they're still having to come on site. You maybe noticed this is not my house. I'm in my office. I've come on site every day of this pandemic, never stopped, never got the opportunity to work from home. And then last, supply chain material supply issues. So there's currently global shortages of many of the materials that we need to continue to produce, and that's been an interesting challenge as well. So before I dive in a little, I wanted to show you something. It's the vision and mission for Catalent. And I know this seems cheesy, but the reason I showed it, it came up in a presentation I was watching from our site a week or two ago. And I thought it was really relevant to what we were going to talk about, because in our vision, and you know, this vision was written down way before we had a pandemic. And in our vision, it specifically talks about how we want to be the preferred biologics partner that can bring speed to patients. And it was fascinating to me to see that in retrospect and think, you know, if I would have seen that pre-pandemic, I would have been like, yeah, speed, whatever. It's all about the bottom line. But now I really understand that Catalent is willing to push on traditional boundaries to say, we understand that that's something that's in place, but does it need to be? Can it be different? Is there a different way we can do it? Think outside the box. And I think we kind of proved that. And again, I have the data. I keep prefacing, but I'm excited for some of the data. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the last 12 months and a little bit into the future, show you what the road has looked like regarding the Moderna vaccine. So at the end of quarter 2 last year, May, June timeframe, we signed a contract with Moderna to produce the commercial COVID-19 vaccine. That was unusual because at the time, Moderna was in phase 2 clinical trials. And they weren't signing a contract for phase 3 clinical production and maybe a little bit of commercial like we would normally see. They were signing a contract for, you know, fill my whole vial line with just producing them starting 6 months later, which was, we'd never seen anything like that, but they had the government backing them. So, okay, you know, they're serious, and they were very, very, very confident that their phase 3 clinical trial was going to go the way that it ended up going. At that time, Moderna was already starting to gather components. So they already had picked their final drug delivery systems, and they were starting to gather those components so that when we needed them, they were able to help supply us with some of those early materials. They were also pretty quick to start purchasing equipment, because if you can imagine, we're going to need a lot of tanks and thaw units and refrigeration units and, you know, you name it. In quarter 3, Catalent, so after we got our contract signed with Moderna, at the time, so we had 3 operational filling lines at that point in time. All 3 I'm currently managing. So we have a vial line, a syringe line, and then what we call the flexi line, because it's flexible. It can fill vials, syringes, or cartridges. When they were installed, the vial and syringe line were considered to be high speed. However, as I mentioned, that was about 12 years ago. The syringe line is still decently high speed, but technology has improved, and so I would call them medium to high speed filling lines. Not slow by any means, but certainly not cutting edge. So in order to meet Moderna's need, we needed a new filling line. So we purchased what we call vial line 3. You're like, wait a minute, you said you have 1 vial line, why are you calling it 3? I'll get there. But vial line 3 was unique in that when you're working at a CDMO or any biologics company and you're going to buy a filling line, this is a massive investment, tens of millions of dollars. You design it custom with whoever is manufacturing that line. In our case, we've stuck with Optima in Germany through all the filling lines we have here. And you figure out how much space you have on your floor plan and how you're going to make this filling line fit. And you ask Optima to make something a little longer, a little shorter. You customize it to fit your needs. But in our case, we didn't have time to start it from scratch with Optima. So we called them and said, what can you get us that's going to fill quickly and can be here soon? And they said, well, it's funny you should ask. We had a client that we were building a fast vial line for who just backed out. They pulled their contract and we're mid-production. So do you want this line? And we were like, you know, it's not exactly, it has a couple features. It's a little bit bigger, but yeah, we'll take it. And we bought that filling line. And within, I think, 4 months, we had it here on site. So in that time, we sent people over to Germany through the pandemic and had them, help with FAT and any of the validation work. And then we shipped it here. In that time, we were building out our facility. So it was a gray space, absolutely nothing in the area, full build out. And that had to have, it was the filling line room, but it was 2 formulation rooms to support that, a room for prepping equipment, washing, autoclaving equipment, and everything that you need, all the tertiary stuff to support a clean room environment. So that was fascinating. I remember being really skeptical, to be honest. We'd be in leadership meetings and they'd be like, yeah, that new vial line. And I'm like, this thing, we didn't design it. It's going to be lousy. Like, I was really kind of like, this is ridiculous. But ultimately, it's a really cool machine. And it's going to be exactly what we needed. So I'm glad somebody had a better vision than I had at the time, because I was certainly not a leader on that front. At the same time, in Q3, that is when the news came out of Moderna's phase 3 clinical. So I don't know if anybody here is working at a company that in some way or another is supporting the pandemic, but when you see your company's name in the news day after day after day after day, it starts to get very real. And we kind of had a moment here of like, oh my gosh, their clinical was not only successful, but extremely successful. And we're going to have to deliver on everything that, my boss's boss promised to the government. And you're kind of looking around like, how are we going to do this? So it was time to strategize. And, we had to really buckle down and figure out what we needed. In Q4, so October, November, December, we filled our first PPQ batch for Moderna. So that was, the qualification batches, the validation batches, making sure that our processes worked, making sure our equipment worked for their product. And those were, it was actually, luckily, a decently easy product to fill. So that made my job a little bit easier. And then Moderna received their emergency use authorization. I think that was in November. Everything changed at that point. An emergency use authorization, I'm hoping and guessing that in my lifetime, I will probably never work on another product that gets an emergency use authorization. They're not super common. It has to mean that the benefit to the patient to get it out quickly is worth the small risk of bypassing like 1 or 2 of the approval processes. So in this case, we did all the validation work. We ran the required media fills. We did, every study, every batch is treated just like any other batch, full QC testing, full release, full batch record review, no corners cut there. But on the end, when you take a product commercial, the very last piece is when the FDA grants you commercial authorization. And in this case, we were shipping and delivering that product before the FDA granted the commercial authorization. That's what the emergency use authorization meant. Now, they still came and audited us, don't get me wrong. They were still on site making sure everything checked out. That was fun, as always. Regulatory audits are always a blast, right? But just that they had, we cut a little bit of time off there to get it into patients faster, which again was because it was compassionate, right? But there's something else that came along with the emergency use authorization, and that's something called a rated order. Is anybody familiar with rated orders? Okay, I'm going to hope that maybe at least one person is like, oh, me. A rated order goes 2 ways. So in one way, it's an amazing tool where basically I get to go to a supplier and be like, I've got a rated order saying that whatever it is I need from you is top of your list. And you're going to get me that material before you give anybody else that material because the government says so. However, those rated orders only work for companies who recognize them. And if you're working with suppliers from all over the world, other countries are like, yeah, that's cute, America, but we're supplying other people too, and they're important too. And So it worked great for any pharmaceutical supply companies that are based in the United States, but it doesn't work great all the time. And then there's another piece to the rated order that's kind of unpleasant, which is that we're given a rated order. So the government's also giving, the same way that I give one to my supplier, they're giving one to me saying, hey, you promised so many doses by so many whatever date, and you have to deliver, or we're going to come in and we're going to take over your plant and we're going to deliver it for you. So it does put the pressure on to make sure that you know, you want to meet your goals, because there's a really big impact if you don't. And luckily, we haven't had that problem. And then looking into the future, so it says Q2, but I mean April, a couple weeks away. We're launching vial line 3, just really quick. And that will be a Moderna only filling line for a couple years at least. So that line is also going to be, or is under my leadership, and we're all kind of like, get your vacation time in now, because April and May are going to be rough months. Okay. We were challenged originally. So remembering back, I said we did our PPQ, our validation batches were in October. We were challenged originally. You start filling in October, and you need to get 20 million doses to the American people by the end of the year. As a leader, this was big, this was tough. We had to figure out how to be efficient in things like line changeover, figure out how to speed up some of our filling processes. We had to staff more. My team was, you know, ops is normally kind of the leader in staffing. So every time I was adding people, I'm looking at the quality and the validation, the engineering teams. I'm like, you better be adding people too. If I'm adding people, you better be adding people. If I'm saying we're going to, you know, be doing whatever, 15 batches a week instead of 12, that means you have to release 15 batches a week instead of 12. So it was definitely, the whole site had to get ready for this. It wasn't just the manufacturing area. And then after the end of the year passed, and again, a lot of this information we're getting, I mean, certainly we're getting it from our company, but sometimes the news beats the communication. Sometimes you get an email from your mom with a link to an article from Wall Street Journal that says, oh, hey, guess what? Catalent just promised that Moderna is going to have 100 million doses by the end of March. And you're like, oh, that has a direct impact on me. Like, today's going to be a fun day at work. Everybody's going to be like, oh, how are we going to do it? The picture on the left here, this is my whiteboard in my office, one of the whiteboards. And I wanted a way to visually track, like, where are we going? Because when you're talking millions of doses, or you're talking how many batches or how many units you're making, the people doing the work, they're so in the depth of today's issue, tomorrow's issue, what happened yesterday. It's hard to step back and see the big impact that you're having. So I started tracking on a mountain, my little mountain climber, and yes, it is the mountain climber from Price is Right, and yes, I do yodel the song sometimes when I move him. So I started tracking with the mountain how many units we were filling.
Super duper, thank you. You're welcome.
So each week we would track how many units. Now, 1 unit is 10 doses. So if those numbers seem low, just multiply by 10. And that was a really good way for me to weekly be sending out a picture of this to my whole team, which is, you know, 300 people, mostly floor manufacturing associates, to say, we're making progress, we're getting there, we're going to reach our goal. Like, here's where we are today, here's where we need to be, we're passing it, it's happening. And I really think that helped keep people motivated. You know, early in the pandemic, it was scary to come to work. Early in the pandemic, we had people who either didn't want to show up or were, you know, very concerned. I was concerned. You know, I've got my mask here on my desk. We wear these all of the time. We actually adopted mask wearing before the state of Indiana mandated it. And I'm sure we're going to continue it after the mandate lifts. We have strict social distancing protocols. I always tell people on my team, you know, we work in the clean rooms, and the air turnover in those rooms, it's probably the safest place in the building. So, you know, you're kind of lucky to be working in a place where the air is very fresh. And honestly, our rates of spread, we haven't had spread at the site. Sure, tons of employees have had it in the past year, of course, but we have done surveillance testing with saliva testing, and we now, you know, if you're a new hire, to hire in, you have to have a negative COVID test. Our safe EH&S department, if you even have so much as a headache, before you come to work that day, you call them and they do an assessment and decide if you're going to come in or not. And yes, we helped pay people, you know, please stay home. You've got COVID day, don't come to the site. So we helped people get tested. Even in the early days where testing was challenging to find, we were pretty tied in with the local health authorities to be like, please help us get these people tested because we need them to come to work to help us make the vaccine to get us through this, right? So it's been fun. Really, really fun as a leader. Every day, something you didn't expect. Okay, I saw a question, but I'm struggling to see how to view the question. Do you see it, Jared?
Yes, I do, and I can read it for you. So it said, when you have rated orders that both require a requested quantity, but you don't have supplies to do it because of those international supply chain issues you spoke of, what happens?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think about in that way because I just live it kind of in the minutia. Well, we either find a way to not have the constraint. So is there a different material we can use? The best idea I can think of, like gowning. I would say last summer was really tough with the simple clean room gowning, gloves, overalls, coveralls, even the reusable scrubs, because we use like the cotton scrubs that get, you know, cleaned and brought back. We were stocked out, and operators are coming to me saying, you know, I need a XL thing and all they have is small, and so I can't gown in and do my job today. And it was tough for us. We were with our supplier on the phone for that stuff daily, very vocal, have to get it to us. And often they would send us, how about this alternative? Can you use this style gown? This one has a hood. I know you don't need a hood. Can you just let it hang off the back? Things like that. So we made some, you know, in a normal world, we'd be like, no, this is our standard. We need our standard. But in COVID, we'd be like, yeah, it's okay if the gloves are blue instead of, you know, beige. It's okay if the gowns have a hood on the back. Some of our scrubs are purple now instead of just normally they're all blue. You got to make, you know, sacrifices in order to do the product, because those things shouldn't really stop us. If you look at it big picture, is a small constraint like that worth stopping people from getting the vaccine? No. So find a way to make it okay. I remember going to quality all the time and being like, hey, I need you to say it's okay for me to use gowns with thumb loops. I know a procedure says no thumb loops, but like I need it to happen, or tomorrow I'm shutting down the lines. And so, you know, there's small concessions to make. Do they really impact the quality of your product? No. So I think over time we got more flexible.
Did you
Sorry,
have to execute those under deviations, or how did you process those as a company?
depending on the material. With vials was what has been and still is one of the hardest things to source. The glass shortage was there before the pandemic. It got worse during the pandemic. We looked at alternate suppliers. So, you know, some of our doses went into these, which are plastic vials with an SiO2 coating. You know, not maybe the choice that I want to use long term for whatever reason, but you know, we did validation work. We did the same qualification work on this that we would do with glass. So we ran through the same protocols that we would with any other component to qualify it, and then said, okay, you know, you use an alternate. On one of my filling lines, I used 2 different vendors of glass. Luckily, I don't know how, but somehow we've gotten lucky and we haven't had issues with stoppers, because normally that's in a rubber is a tough thing to get, but we've been okay with sourcing stoppers. Yeah, then there's some like niche items that we order, like customized tubing pathways or whatever. Those can be challenging too. I don't know, just kind of keep working on it. As a leader in ops, I would say my best strategy so far has been to try and identify those constraints early and talk to my supply chain people early to say, I know that their delivery date is March 10th and I need it March 12th. And so technically that's okay, but can you get it to me faster? Because I'm worried that they're going to miss their date, or I'm worried they're going to tell us they had a supply chain issue. It's not uncommon. I dealt with one today where my supplier is saying, well, I can't make that for you because my supplier is not supplying. And you're just like, oh, okay. Can you give them the rated order that I gave you? Which they do sometimes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, sure. That's really nice. Thanks for answering that. You know, were those silicon dioxide vials even around before the pandemic here, or did you just make that?
They were. They were. You know, what's funny is, sorry, this is like an aside. I went to a glass conference in, I think it was like 2011, and I met the reps for SiO2, this company, when they were just like 3 people with an idea. And so it was funny to see them come back around. So I think they've been around. I don't know how much success they've had. I don't know if they're in a commercial package yet. But yeah, they were around. And it was really Moderna's idea to say, if glass is going to be a problem, let's find a solution that's not glass. So, I mean, I credit their innovation in thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I was just curious, you know, it's like how those rated orders worked, and then, you know, if you can't supply them, then who do you have to fess up to? Who tells you that that's bad? And does the government control you on that, or I don't know. I was just
So
curious.
I wouldn't call, well, we haven't been in a situation where they've had to come in and take over. But I will say we have, everybody's familiar with Operation Warp Speed. It's kind of a phrase that's been available for the last year. So Operation Warp Speed sent a major from the United States government to our facility last fall. And he is here every day, just like a person implant would be from a client. And, you know, he's here. You know, it might seem kind of like he's here to keep an eye on us, but the truth is he's here to help us. So if I have a supply issue, I can take it straight to him, and he will get on the phone with the supplier, and he has a lot more clout than maybe we do. And if he doesn't get what he likes, he calls his boss, which is Major Moderna, who's been in the news a lot as being kind of the leader of Operation Warp Speed. And if he doesn't get what he wants, he calls the White House. And it's that simple.
Nice to have in your procurement side pocket there.
I think we'll miss it when it's gone, maybe.
Oh, I'm
That's
sure
awesome. Yeah.
that'll create some challenges.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, let me get to the next slide. Did we do it? Okay. This graph is showing the number of units that my filling area produces every month. So this is not just Moderna. This is going to be any unit for any client. In September, that was before we started making the vaccine, we were doing about 2 million units a month, which I remember the year that we celebrated, we hit 3 million in the year, and we had like a big party. So to be doing 2 million a month, like it's no big deal, was kind of, you know, I was already like, woo, we're doing great. Like, I'm good at my job. This is awesome. But remember, their ask for us was 20 million doses by the end of December. So that'd be 2 million units on top of what I'm already doing, because, you know, we wanted as many existing clients as we could. We wanted to continue to support. Obviously, we only have so much fill line, so I you know, wasn't able to, through these challenging months of really launching the vaccine, get all of my clients on the lines, but we tried to still fill as many other projects as we could. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so another reminder, those validation batches happened in October. So here's how the rest of the year looked. October, November, and December were very high output months, with December ending around 3.5 million units just in December. So we almost doubled from September to December. And yes, we did meet the 20 million doses by the end of December out to market. Now, I know people are having a hard time believing that, right? Because it's like, wait, but we kept hearing in the news, there's no doses, no doses, no doses. What was frustrating to us is I remember reading one, I think it was one of the business journals wrote about us and Moderna and Operation Warp Speed, and we're missing the mark. And it was one sentence in the whole article that really called out the problem, which was that the government had distribution issues. So the goal was to get 20 million units released by the end of December. We accomplished that, but the government wasn't ready to distribute 20 million doses. And so it even said, it said it in the article, I think it said, the government has X number of doses released and ready to ship, but they have nowhere to ship them. And so that was really hard for me and I think my team, because in the news, sometimes you felt like you were being raked over the coals, but it's like, we did it. What I think our motto has been, they asked, we delivered. We delivered. Why are you so mad? But we get it, right? There were other things there. We're just a small piece of the puzzle. And then January, so now the task, December ends, we work through Christmas, we work through New Year's, December ends, and now I'm like, okay, we did it, but new hurdle, 100 million doses in 3 months. So it took me 3 months to make 20 million doses. Now you got to do 100 million in the next 3 months, or sorry, 80 million, because it's 100 million total. And things got real interesting, but again, I mean, we were able to achieve it. So January, I'm obviously not quite to the end of March yet, but January was at 5.5 million. So on good pace there. We filled our 100 millionth dose on March 3rd. And if any of you work in quality, you'll know it takes time to release product. So if I filled it on March 3rd and you have to release it by March 31st, that's pretty good. You've got almost a whole month to do the release. And yeah, so we're on track to, by next week, to have the 100 million doses, no problem, which again, crazy. I mean, I guess it's just like hard to even talk about the things we did. Our filling lines, I think previously one of my filling lines, like the rate, a good rate. If we were hitting like 70 vials a minute, we'd be like, yeah, 70 vials a minute, like this is good. And like today I walk by the line, it's doing 102 vials a minute. Like we figured out ways to optimize the machinery to reduce our changeover time between batches by campaigning more lots back to back. Every time we made a big process change, we had to do change controls, we had to do validation work, we had to, run the gambit, make sure it was within our media qualifications. So it took a lot of legwork, but ultimately, sometimes it was just as much as like you're chatting with someone and you come up with an idea and you're like, oh, this could be something, this could help us get out another batch a month or whatever it is, and you run to your quality partner and say like, how do you feel about this? I think we should pursue it a little. Let's see if it's going to work. So really every day we were trying to come up with new ways to just do better. Okay, so I already kind of buried the lead that we met our goal for this quarter. Now I have a new goal. Moderna has promised the government that every 60 days we will deliver 100 million doses. So to recap, it's taking me 6 months to make 100 million doses, and now every 60 days I have to do another 100 million. This is a quote from our COO, and I think when I read this quote like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I was like, yeah, whatever. It's just like, some executive saying something motivational. But reading it now, where he's saying, it's not impossible, you just haven't done it yet, it makes sense to me. Because back in August or even May, when we signed the first contract with Moderna, I was like, this is impossible. When they said we're going to buy this third vial line, I was like, you guys are crazy. But I was wrong. It wasn't impossible. We just hadn't done it. And now that we've done it, I look at challenges a little bit differently. I'm like, okay, it is possible. It might be difficult. We can get there. And if we didn't, hopefully we're at least proud of what we were able to accomplish. Let's talk about staffing. This is employee growth at my site. So not for Catalent holistically, just at this one site in Little Bloomington, Indiana. As I mentioned, I hired in when we were sub 200 employees. And it is wild to see the growth. The arrow is showing where we are today. As of this week, we were at 2,700. The 1,400 was March of last year, so a year ago. So in a year, we've grown 1,300 people, and the 3,500 is where we're expected to be by the end of the calendar year, end of 2021. It's wild, but you need people to support these new projects. And one thing, so most of my experience is with the Moderna project, but our site is also filling the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And if you search Catalent Johnson & Johnson, it'll be, the first couple things that come up. They actually had a press release, I think it was yesterday, where we shipped our first doses. Actually, yeah, here's pictures. So a lot of the employee growth was for the Moderna, and a lot of it was for the Johnson & Johnson. I think so for Johnson & Johnson, the progress was a little bit different. And I'm not an expert in that one quite as much because I'm not as involved. Luckily, at some point our leadership splits because I think it'd be way too much for me to handle. My boss gets to deal with that. But there was a bit of a difference. So with this program, we had a part of our building that was not built out. It was gray space that we had already designed a vial line, a high-speed vial line, and a high-speed syringe line. We had already worked with Optima. We already designed the lines. We already had floor plans ready for the build-out. And all of that was going to happen regardless of the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit, my GM here at the site saw it as an opportunity. Well, if I can get that project to happen faster, if I can get the machine built faster and get the area designed faster and get everything done faster, it'll be in time to make one of these big vaccines. So he was able to secure a contract with Johnson & Johnson in May last year, and the filling line shipped to us from Germany in October, and we launched that filling line December, January timeframe. It was accelerated 10 months. 10 months is a lot to pull forward a massive construction project. And, hopefully everyone here has a little bit of experience in a clean room. It is not an easy facility to control and maintain. So to do that 10 months sooner than you were planning, I thought was really impressive. The Johnson & Johnson team they're really proud of what they've accomplished. They're a big reason why our headcount has grown, as well as the Moderna vaccine. And again, they were really creative in how to get vaccine out faster. It's an 8-headed, like an 8-needle fill line instead of a 4-needle fill line, like our old models. They're doing, they went media, PPQ, and start filling commercial product at risk. So you start putting product at risk before you even know if your medias are going to pass, before you know that your validation work is going to pass, hoping that your quality system and controls are in place to be successful. And they were in this case, which, hopefully a site with our tenure would be able to do that successfully. So I'm glad it worked. It took a lot of micromanaging. We felt like supervisors were floor leads and managers were supervising, and the senior managers and directors were managing. Like, it's a lot of having to have daily meetings with Johnson & Johnson. They meet twice a day with Johnson & Johnson, 7 a.m., 7 p.m., every single day. With Moderna, we meet every day. I think there's 2 meetings a day with Moderna. We have a meeting with executives at Catalent every day to talk about Moderna and talk about Johnson & Johnson. It's constant micromanaging, because they want to know that if there's going to be a problem, if there's an issue that comes up, they want to know that they are ready to talk about it. Because when you're working this closely, and again, something that news is talking about you all the time, or the government is literally watching what you're doing, you want to be able, as a high-level leader, to be able to get ahead of those and say, hey, we're going to have a little bit of an issue, but we'll make it up, don't worry, and not be caught off guard. So it's been really, really, really fun. Okay. This slide is Catalent holistically. It's not my site specific, but for all of Catalent, because other Catalent sites, some of our smaller sites, some of our international sites are also working on vaccines and treatments related to COVID. We are on track for, by the end of this calendar year, no, end of fiscal year 2022, to have done 1 billion doses of vaccine and therapies and worked with 80 different compounds. I mean, it's incredible. Again, I think it goes back to our vision statement is to be fast and innovative and help patients that need it. And Catalent really dove into helping with COVID, which is pretty cool. I don't have a picture of the site, but the Anani site in Italy is making the AstraZeneca vaccine. You can Google that as well. And that one has a unique story as well. You know, a normal vaccine approval cycle is 10 years pre-pandemic. But through the pandemic, we've done it 3 times now with Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca, where we've taken a vaccine from the R&D lab through approval in less than 2 years. So the question is, will the industry ever go back? Because I don't think it will. Now, I'm not saying it'll be 2 years in the future, because you're not going to have things like rated orders. But I do think it'll be faster than 10. I think we've proven that there's ways to be flexible and keep your quality control and do it in maybe 4 to 5 years. And really, that's a big benefit for humanity, because imagine that they are able to come up with, I mean, I know this is scientifically crazy, but for the analogy, bear with me, a vaccine for cancer. You don't want to wait 10 years. You're going to want that sooner. And now we kind of have a blueprint on how to make that happen for treatments in the future. It was possible because of money, sacrifice, and focus. Like, there's no surprise here when the government is willing to get involved and write you checks. You're fast at what you do. They make sure that you get it done, right? Because they're paying for you. Our employees have spent a lot of time away from home, a lot of time away from their family during this. And the focus has been, I mean, like I said, you know, things that I, in the early days, turned my nose up at, that's a bad idea, you guys are crazy. Now I'm like, I hear those ideas and I'm like, okay, let me think about it. Let me really vet that, because things that seemed crazy a year ago don't seem crazy anymore. Another thing that, you know, I think the industry will forever be changed by is mRNA technology. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are near to the front of mRNA products, but I think the pipeline is probably pretty big. And, you know, I'm excited to work on more of them. They seem like a really great way to get our body to respond in the way that we'd like it to help protect us. And then, you know, our site right now is doing, we're doing the vaccines. We've got a couple treatments, and it just feels good. Like I said, you know, we're still working on other client products as well. And with the addition of the vial line 3, I'll be able to shift Moderna to a dedicated line and reopen up my capacity for our other clients and other patients. And, you know, working for a site that you work on so many different products and know that you're impacting patients, it's great. You get an employee that comes to your office and says, you know, I just wanted to say, my grandmother used one of our products the other day, and, you know, it's going to help her with, you know, you name it, her asthma, her eye disease, her cancer, and it feels good. So I love working at a place like this. It is crazy and stressful, but very, very exciting. And with that, I'll take questions and show off my lovely vaccination card. Yes, I got Moderna.
The rest of us are envious, I'm sure.
End of the month for
Yes,
the majority of us, so that'll be good. But
hey,
first,
my husband was able to get it from a wait list, so sign up for the wait list.
I want to say superb presentation, Sophia. You know, phenomenal content, extremely interesting, and just amazing to see the turnaround. And I'm glad you discussed, the change to status quo of business, and the turnaround and approval of products, and so yeah, hopefully there is a paradigm shift within industry, that we can take a more risk-based approach and get approval faster. So great to hear that you're in alignment with that as well. So I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. There's a question if Catalent was part of COVAX.
I don't know, actually. You would think maybe I'm just not high level enough.
I asked that question, Sophia. Thanks for the great talk. It was really fascinating. The reason I asked that is because it's really the bigger question is, how does Catalent play a part in distributing the vaccine worldwide?
Yeah.
And COVAX is the most obvious, infrastructure for that.
Yep. I am familiar with COVAX, of course. I don't know. So really, I think it would be if Moderna is part of COVAX, right? Because we're just for them, they can do with it whatever they like.
Yep.
I certainly know that we're not going to stop production when America's vaccinated. So
right.
That bodes well.
Sophia, this is Scott. I have a question. Do you see other industries using the COVID vaccines and what you guys did as a way for them to try and shorten their time frame on some of the regulations that they have to work through as well?
I hope so. My husband works for a medical device company, and sometimes he'll tell me about a problem, and in my head, I'm like, well, that's silly. You guys just need to work around that. Like we do it all the time. But what I'm thinking is people people who are in my position at other companies at some point will move on to more companies, and so hopefully, directly or indirectly, we'll be able to kind of spread that mindset. My GM here, he's a demanding guy, and some days it's difficult, right? But on other days you reflect and you're like, he really pushed us to do things that I don't know I would have ever pushed people to do. But now that I've seen how that worked and how it was able to get a good result for our patients, I feel like I've learned some strategies there. His way of thinking is very much like, if it's not a true roadblock, I don't want to hear about it. You might tell me it's a roadblock, but show me the regulation. If it's not written in the regulations, or if you haven't called the FDA to be like, hey, how do you guys really feel about this? Then you haven't challenged it enough. So very much a mindset that I think we all could benefit from. It's easy in a leadership position. I tell people this all the time. They want to make a change like let's not allow people to have headphones on in the parking lot. It is really, really, really easy to put rules in place. It's hard to take them away. And that's, I think, sometimes where pharma and med device have been, where we've been in these regulated industries and they've developed over so many decades. But now we're at a point where at some point, those regulations are going to stymie growth. And it's good to reevaluate what's really needed for the safety and what's not.
Very good points. Good mindsets to have. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was amazing and awesome. Thank you.
I just want to echo that as well. It's a really excellent presentation. Thanks for showing us all this.
Yes, thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
If nobody has any other questions, I was just, you heard about going from, what was it, 70 to 104 vials per second, right?
Per minute, yeah.
Per minute. Okay. Okay. I was thinking that's really quick. I wasn't sure if you said second or minute, and so I was thinking that's a really fast way to move vials, delicate vials. And so I was
Yeah.
just thinking about that. And so you did that by optimizing some machines, uh, but you didn't change up your line though, did you? You didn't buy extra machines for it. Did you just like overclock the machines, or how'd you do that?
You know, one of the first things we looked at, so on a filling line, you have 4 or 5 pieces of equipment that are in series. You've got your vial washer, a dehydrogenation tunnel, you have your filling area, your stoppering, and your capping. And the first question is, well, which one is your current constraint? So maybe you say, okay, well, currently my washer is the one that runs the slowest. It's the one where the throughput rate is the lowest. Can you optimize the washer? Oh, well, actually, yeah, it turns out we haven't changed out the belts on that washer in 5 years. So if you change the belts, does it run faster? Yes, it does. Or we look at the qualification. Well, we qualified the washer, I'm going to make up something, but we qualified it at a range of 100 to 300 unit of whatever, but we're running it at 200. Well, why are you running it at 200 if you qualified it up to 300? Can you take it to 250? Can you take it to 275? Is it going to really break down? Does it matter? It's within your qualification range. So then you turn up your washer. It's not the constraint now. What's your constraint? Oh, it's the capper. Okay, well, why is the capper slow? So you just continue to like iterate. Our GM has this quote, and the first time I heard it, it was like, oh, are you kidding me? But I actually really love it, and I've repeated it, so I'll repeat it for you. He says, continuous improvement is not a race. There's no finish line. It's a death march. Because you keep going, you improve, you keep going, you improve, you keep growing, right? It's the Toyota way.
I'm going to use that in class.
That actually is very, very good. Question with Optima. Did you was Andreas Shook a part of the project?
Oh, I couldn't say. I have a manager that manages most of the Optima relationships, and I try not to micromanage too much. So maybe.
Gotcha. Well, no, just had worked with Andreas on an Optima line at CSL Bearing, and he's one of the main North American consultants for the line. So I'm assuming he was a part of that one too. But
I think in some way or another we worked with all of the Optima team because we've been in partnership with them for a long time.
I'm sure.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute.
I'm just thinking about, it's like the way that you were able to optimize that. I understand, that you're always like taking those steps to make that work. And I was party to some steel sheet and copper sheet production and stuff like that. But, with those foundries and smelting processes, there's not really a way that you can optimize that by changing out belts. And so I guess I didn't really think about how simple the solutions would be, I guess, for you. I'm not trying to trivialize what you're doing or anything like that, right? But it's just the way that you can optimize your machines and stuff, and the part where they were underclocked. I'm just surprised that those weren't like noticed before, and so they weren't clocked up before.
We were meeting our demand before, and nobody had ever said, I mean, we grow every year, we do more. I think we've had like a consistent 30% growth in revenue year after year for this site, even when it was cooked. Like that's just been kind of a norm. But we still had enough growth without having to do those things pre this vaccine. And this vaccine really challenged us to look at the more minute details of how to improve.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome that you had the room to be able to do that and you were able to identify them. So we see all of like those Lean Six principles, right off the bat, directly applied. That's pretty cool. All right, thanks.
This is Bob Funk. I have a question also with respect to predictive maintenance. I don't even know if you've had time to do this or not, but I know in the whole reliability world, in terms of using vibration monitoring and thermal imaging and things like that, FedEx is one of the largest that uses this like crazy, but that's the whole growth area and reliability, so that they make sure that their equipment don't have a chance to go down. I don't know. I doubt you guys even had time to get into that, or did you use things like that too?
We obviously do preventative maintenance, and we do have a lot of reliability engineers that strategize on what's the best way, how do you focus your time. You know, one thing we were challenged with this year is we couldn't do a true winter shutdown, right? Most pharma companies do 2 shutdowns a year where you do most of the maintenance on your machine. You do one in the summer, one in the winter. So we did a rolling shutdown. Each filling line shut down for its portion of time, but none of them ever stopped at the same time. And that was one way to continue to produce. We kept the area up in the grade room quality, and did a rolling shutdown. So we still were able to do preventative maintenance on the equipment, but we did evaluate, you know, if your preventative maintenance is going to take 12 days, are some of those really necessary, or can they wait till the next shutdown? And really being lean on choosing what we really need to do. And then, you know, we have, like yesterday, we did a little bit of preventative maintenance on the line, not in a shutdown period. It was something that we identified, a piece of equipment just needed some refinishing. It's only going to take a couple hours, but we partnered it at the same time where there was some downtime on the line that was already planned. So we'll try and, you know, utilize those moments to do more than one thing. Like it might be QC is in there testing some filters at the same time that engineering's doing maintenance on part, at the same time that validation's doing a study on, you know, a smaller piece of equipment in the room. And, you know, they don't interrupt each other. So do them all at the same time and get it done so that you can get back to work.
Yeah, the thing on this one here, and I might not have made it clear because it's a little different. It's not preventive maintenance only, it's predictive maintenance. Literally what they've got is through these monitoring systems, they will tell you when they're going to future break. And it's extremely, I mean, it's not perfectly accurate, but it's such a high one. Set up places like FedEx and that are using it so that they can basically know in advance what lines are going to have bearings go down or problems here or that. So that it's not the same as typical preventive maintenance. It literally tells you. It's a huge science that's taken off in a lot of places. I can see where, I don't know, but I would assume it really could be powerful for you guys if you're using that. I don't know if you were aware of that, but it's a different take on it where the machines tell you, I'm getting a hot bearing on something that's a belt as an example. It's going to tell you in advance, you better get that for this. So you're thinking about it because the thermal imaging picks it up. Things like that. It's a very different way, but didn't know if you guys already do anything like that.
Yeah, I should have included a picture in my presentation of what our filling lines look like. So we use isolator barrier technology, which means that the equipment is contained within basically a big glass box, and you're accessing through glove ports only. And that's how we keep our sterile grade A filling. So, you know, something like that where you're going to rely on a lot of sensors and equipment to detect, we can't put those too close to our equipment because you can't put them in the sterile environment. So I think we're limited in some ways, but I like that idea.
It's great what you guys are doing too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Actually, Robert there brings up a really good point. You know, with those foundries that I was talking about, we always have like a constant temperature monitoring system, right? And so then we'd clock that over time and then anticipate that it would break, you know, at a specific, you know, amount of times that it had been up to that temperature, or like how much time it had been subject to that temperature. And so the accountants were able to predict like ahead of time that it was going to cost us X amounts to be able to replace those things, thanks to like the inputs from like the quality engineers. And so I don't know. I didn't know that FedEx did it. That's pretty freaking cool. I like that a lot. But anyway, sorry. I thought that was interesting.
Any other questions? All right. If I don't see anything else come up in the chat, but Sophia, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your evening to present to the Lafayette section of ASQ. Again, superb presentation, and please, send our thanks to your team there for all that they do and all that they have done through all of the COVID and pandemic. So, thank you again.
All right.
Thanks for getting us the 200 million doses. We're ready.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I hope you all have an opportunity to get the vaccine soon.
Got it. Got the Moderna.
Yep, I got Moderna too. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you all hopefully next month for our April meeting.
Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Sophia. Much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Sophia.
Take care, all. Have a good night.
See ya.
Good night, everybody.
Take care. Thanks, Sophia.